Quick reminder, the 22% off coupon code for the investing course, agent course, or the in-person events does expire today, October 4th. Welcome back to another Meet Kevin report. Today we're talking about the economy doing worse than expected, and I'm gonna pop open this monster because I'm sad about it. I guess if I were sad, I should be having alcohol, not a monster, but I got this at a gas station at like 1 a.m., so I thought, why not give it a shot? All right, so here's the scoop. We've had a pretty bad week in terms of news. And not only did Tesla disappoint some folks because they delivered 2,000 less cars than expected, but the Federal Reserve has been keeping an eye on the services data, and we recently had services data come out way lower than expected. The Institute for Supply Management Statistics were way below expectations, and unfortunately, that has been what has rocked the Dow Jones to fall 2 days in a row and essentially remain flat year over year compared to 2018. We've seen a lot of that similar flatness in real estate as well, with the exception of areas like San Jose and Manhattan, where real estate prices have been hit a little bit harder than the rest of the country. Well, anytime we have a bunch of bad news that comes together, everybody looks forward to the next Federal Open Market Committee meeting. Basically, that meeting where the Federal Reserve gets together and they go, should we drop interest rates? Yeah, well, that meeting is next up on October 29th and October 30th, and I have a feeling they won't have to bring costumes. Things will be scary enough. And so that begs the question, what's going to happen if the Federal Reserve reduces interest rates to 0%? That is back to 0%, because they used to be 0%, and then they got the bright idea to jump them up way too freaking high, way too fast at the beginning of 2018, and look where we are now. We're in the poopers. Or at least I will be after I finish this monster. Well, to me, there are 3 possible scenarios, and none of the 3 scenarios are that great, which means I guess I should hold out hope for a possible wonderful 4th case scenario, but I'm not going to. So, number 1, we're going to start with the deflationary scenario. So, this is probably the worst case scenario. No government wants deflation. Deflation is basically when things become less expensive, which sounds nice because I'd like to be able to pick up another pair of Beats headphones cheaper than what they are today. The problem is when prices of things go down, companies can't afford to pay their workers as much, and people's incomes tend to go down. The amount of services and the amount of stuff people are spending money on tends to go down as well, so commission people like real estate agents also end up making less money, especially as housing prices fall, stock prices fall, and pretty much everything just spirals out of control in a downward direction. In fact, that's why sometimes deflation is considered a deflationary spiral, because things just spiral out of control because one thing getting worse just leads to another thing getting worse, and pretty much the only way to get out of a deflationary spiral is for prices to get so low through a very deep and painful recession that people are finally convinced that it's time to go shopping again because them Beats headphones be $10. Okay, maybe not that bad, but that's about the gist of it. So what does well and what does poorly in a deflationary time? Well, things that do poorly are, well, pretty much anything. That is literally anything that is a thing does poorly. Any real estate, stocks, assets, yeah, even precious metals, most things do very poorly. Also, anybody getting stuck holding debt also gets screwed, because as you make less money, that debt essentially becomes more expensive for you to pay off, which is really, really bad. This means the only people who really do well in deflationary times are either people who are sitting around holding cash or long-term bonds, because bonds are basically a guarantee of you getting cash back, but you could also make money in the meantime, and you usually make more money in the meantime because you have a higher interest rate on longer-term bonds than you probably can get anywhere else during a deflationary time. In other words, bonds and cash do well, everything else seems to suck. Now, governments generally won't let deflation happen, unless of course you're stuck in the EU, where nobody can figure out what anybody wants to do to help anybody out, and it takes 3 years for people to even figure out how to leave the club of not knowing what to do. That's a Brexit joke, by the way. So the next worst case scenario is actually the opposite of deflation, and that would be called hyperinflation. I know it seems kind of weird that both of these scenarios would be possible because you'd think we'd be going in the direction of one or the other, but think about this for a moment. As the economy slows down and interest rates go down, it is quite possible that asset prices and everything just slowly starts falling, and as a result we experience deflation. The government prints money and people still don't spend. So all it would take is people not spending to have deflation. It's quite possible. On the flip side, some people think that because the government fears deflation so much, the government is going to print so freaking much money, and consumers are going to be just happy enough to take it, and companies and banks will borrow it and lend it out or whatever they want to do, and they will create so much inflation in the economy that is asset prices will soar, that is stocks will go up, real estate will go up, the cost of goods and services, everything's going to get more expensive. But we're actually not just going to see some normal amount of inflation, we're going to see hyperinflation. And then as this sort of crazy hyperinflation happens, where instead of having 2% inflation, we see 8, 9, 10% inflation, as that starts happening, the Fed will be forced to raise interest rates, and that raising of interest rates will make borrowing much more expensive again, and that in itself is going to bring the economy right back down, and then we will experience a hyperinflation-induced recession, which would basically destroy asset prices again, and then people would be able to go shop at the bottom. So basically here you have a deflationary scenario and an inflationary scenario, and in both of these we end up with a nasty recession and an opportunity to go shopping at the bottom. However, in the inflationary time, rather than buying bonds and holding cash, you're going to want to hold safe harbor assets, which some people consider that to be gold. I personally like real estate in this scenario as well, especially below market value purchased real estate, like what we talk about in the real estate investing course linked below. And the reason real estate tends to do well is because A, people need a place to live, and B, debt tends to do well in inflationary times because it's easier to pay off the debt as inflation happens. However, a subsequent fall in asset prices during a recession would obviously hurt any kind of short-term borrowers or people like I get in the comments section all the time who say things like, wow, you're screwed next recession because you're not even old enough to have really lived through a recession as an investor. Now, the theory goes that real estate debt should do well during this time because as there's inflation, it's easier to pay off debt. Yeah, prices might come down, but if you can hold through it, you'll be totally fine. And this is why it's so important to always buy really good quality real estate that you can rent out through the ups and downs of the markets. So we've heard about the deflationary scenario and what does good and what does poorly. We've heard about the hyperinflation scenario, what does good and what does poorly. Well, what's a third possible scenario? Well, a third possible scenario, in my opinion, is that while this may be so far the longest bull run the United States has ever seen, we might experience the longest and most shallow recession ever. That is, we might continue to see slow or slightly negative growth for a long period of time, 5 to 10 years. To me, I think this is partly possible because as the rest of the world slows down, people are going to look to invest in things that are doing decently, which might be things like the United States dollar, which the stronger the US dollar is, the easier it is for the Federal Reserve to keep interest rates at zero, keep printing money, to keep stimulating the economy, but that stimulus might fall relatively flat, and we'll just continue to see relatively flat or nominal growth in stocks, most assets like real estate or anything else, and we'll just sort of ride this bumpy road of a slower growth period of time. In my opinion, I think pretty much everything will do somewhat decently or equally poorly in this scenario. I think we'll see a lot of flatness in stocks and a lot of flatness in real estate and a lot of flatness even in bonds. There probably won't be much that shifts anything unless expectations suddenly and dramatically change. That is, we might just have to get used to this slow GDP growth of 1.5% to 2%, 2.5% in the United States for the next, who knows, 5 years, whatever. But it's quite possible that rather than seeing a sudden recession of a drop in prices of 40% and then some kind of recovery, we just see pretty much no growth for 5 years. And in that scenario, all I would do is, well, kind of keep doing what I'm doing. That's buying below market value real estate again and basically just hanging out while continuing to pick up good deals as I see them. I'll take that, I'll take that, I'll take that, and doing all of that in as low risk of a way as possible, which is what I teach in the real estate investing course. See, I think a lot of people think that I'm just some like cavalier guy that's gonna go put everything on black, but I'm actually really, really conservative. And I teach that conservativeness not only on this channel, but in the courses. And so now I'm curious to hear what you think. What do you think about the possibility that, well, the market might just stay scenario 3 flat for 5 years? Or do you think we're going to see deflation or hyperinflation? Well, let me know down below. Follow me on Instagram, and until next time.